This is a short video to try and describe and show how in math classes your final or overall grade or score is calculated. In math classes, we use what's called weighted grades, or sometimes called weighted scores. So I want to explain to you how you can look at your scores in your class and then how your overall score is calculated. A lot of students don't understand this, and especially at the end of their class, when they look at their homework scores or their quiz scores or their test scores, they're confused as to why their overall score is the way it is. Now, what I want to do as I explain this, I want to try and go into Ivy Learn and look at the Gradebook. And I believe this is, in a second, when I go into Ivy Learn, I've set up sort of a example gradebook using, instead of a name, it's just called Test Student. But it has information in it that should look like the kind of information that you would see if you went into your grades in Ivy Learn. And when I do that, I want to show you some information that's important. And it's the kind of information that we will need to determine how to calculate our overall score. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and try and go in to what should look like a typical grade book. So here, this just is a class. Of course, this is test student. This is just an example. And there are not a lot of scores here. I've put in just a few scores to sort of give you what I need to show you what to do. For instance, I put in a final exam score of 84, and I have a homework score of a 92 out of 100. And later on, I have a quiz score 8 out of 10. And test number 3 was 86 out of 100. So I just put in enough grades in here to sort of fill it out to see what's going on. Now, the first thing I want to point out to you, if you go into your grade book and you look up here at the top right side of your grade book, you notice this says assignments are weighted by group. So this names the group and the weighting. This basically tells you in your class what each kind of assignment is worth. In other words, quizzes, under weight it says 5%. That means the scores you get on quizzes will amount to 5% of your final grade. For homework, how you do on the homework will amount to 15% of your final grade. Midterm exams, usually in most math classes, you have 3 or 4 midterm exams or tests. And turns out in this class, they're going to count for 55% of your grade, which means, if you think about it, midterm exams have the most impact on your grade. It's over half your grade is going to be determined by the scores on your midterm exams. Excuse me. Now, as you keep going, the last thing we're going to look at is final exams, and it says your overall grade for this class, 25% of your grade will be determined by the final exam. Now, there are a couple of other categories here, but you notice there are zeros. So there are really 4 things that will determine your grade: the score you get on the quizzes, your homework scores, your midterm exam scores, your final exam scores. You notice if you add up these percents here, down here at the bottom, they add up to 100%. So this, in a sense, should give you an idea of what's going to most impact your overall grade. Obviously, quizzes only account for 5% of your final grade. Therefore, they have sort of the least impact. What has the most impact? Well, obviously your midterm exams. That's over half your grade. If we look here, your final exam accounts for 25% or 1/4 of your grade. So that's pretty important. And then also we have homework, which is 15%, which is something, but it's definitely not the most important thing in this class. So what I want to do is I'm going to write down this information here. So when I show you how we do the calculation, so I'm going to write down quizzes are 5%. Homework is 15%. Midterm exams are worth 55%. And the final exam is worth 25%. Now, before we leave this screen, let me show you one other thing that we're going to need. So this is for the overall class, how it's broken down. Now over here are my actual scores. And if I go way down to the bottom, so these are all the individual assignments, homeworks, quizzes, test scores. But if I go way to the bottom, you see here, you see quizzes, homework, midterm exams, final exams. The 4 categories that are going to determine my final grade, you see them listed here at the bottom. And this is my current score for each of those categories, each of those groups. For instance, this is saying for quizzes, so you take all the quizzes and you combine them all. This is saying as of right now, I'm getting an overall score of 80% on my quizzes. And then if you look at all my homework assignments that I've completed, I have a 92% homework score. That means it's pretty good for homework. Midterm exams, if you combine the scores on my midterm exams so far, I've got a score of 86%. And then on my final exam, I've got 84%. So I'm going to, on this sheet of paper, write this information down, and then we'll talk about it. So on quizzes, so far, I'm at 80%. Homework, I'm at 92%. Midterm exams, I'm at 86%. And final exam, 84%. So once again, when you look at your grade book in IB Learn, if you want to try and determine how they calculate your overall grade, you need to look up here because this gives the weighting, and you look way at the bottom and this gives your scores for each of those groups. Now in a minute, we're going to calculate, I'm going to show you the calculation that's going to figure out this 86.1%. Because right now it's saying, according to how I've done so far in this class, my overall grade is 86.1%. Sometimes you may have thought, how do they get this total or this overall grade? Well, I'm going to show you. Now it's interesting how on the homework, I'm over 90%, but you notice my grade is less than that. And that's because homework is only worth 15% of my grade. The most important part of my grade are the exams. So if I'm getting 86% on the exams, then you can see how that is going to impact things. So let me go back and show you how we perform this calculation. This calculation is going to be based upon the weightings, this information up here, and then also the actual scores of how I'm doing in this class. So I sort of wrote down the information. So here's the weighting. Once again, quizzes 5%, homework 15%, midterm exams 55%. And here are my actual scores for each of those categories. So in this class so far, on my quizzes, I'm getting an 80% score. On my homework, I'm getting a 92%, and so on. So then how I think Ivy Learn calls it total. Let me call it total too. How do you calculate the total? Well, let me write it out and then we'll actually do the calculation. I'm going to take the weight of the quiz score times, I'll call it my quiz score. I'm going to add to it the homework weight times my homework score. And then I'll call it MT for midterm exam. Midterm exam weight times my midterm exam score plus the final exam weight times my So we got 4 parts here we're adding together. You can see this is like the quiz information, the homework information, the midterm exam information, and the final exam information. So how do I plug in these numbers into here and what happens? Well, here's something that's very important. When you work with decimals, I don't have the time or want to take the time to go into detail, but oftentimes when you do calculations with percents, you don't actually enter the percent number. Now, this might be a little confusing because what I'm going to do here, I'm going to take each of these percents for my weightings. I guess I can label this. These are the weights, and these are my scores. For the weights, when I do this calculation, I'm not going to plug in 5 for quizzes. Instead, I need to convert each of these weighting percents into a decimal. So hopefully you remember how to convert percent to decimal. 5% as a decimal is 0.05. 15% as a decimal is 0.15. 55% is 0.55 and 25% is 0.25. So what I'm going to do is, now it's interesting how for my scores, I'm going to leave these numbers as a percent when I plug it into my calculation. So I know it might be confusing, but for the weights, I don't want to plug in the percent number. I want to plug in the decimal number. But when I plug in my scores, I will go ahead and plug in the percent number. Because when I do this calculation, my total is going to be my final grade as a percent. So let's just do this. Hopefully this will make sense. So this says, take the quiz weight and you multiply it by my quiz score. So the quiz weight is 0.05. So the quiz weight is 0.05. My quiz score in the class so far, I'm getting 80% on my quizzes. So I just plug in an 80%. Then plus, I do the same thing for the homework. The weighting times my homework score. So the weighting for homework is 50%, which I'm going to put in as 0.15. And then my homework score, 92%, and I go ahead and just write that in as 92%. Now, for the midterm, the weighting is 0.55, and my midterm score so far is 86%. And finally, if I could squeeze it in here, the final exam, the weighting's 0.25. And the score, my score so far, or on the final exam, is 84%. So if I just show you, so this is the quiz part of it. Here's the homework part of it. Here's the midterm exam part of it. And here's the final exam. Now I simply grab my calculator and I'm going to take 0.05 times 80 plus 0.15 times 92 plus, matter of fact, I'll do this step by step just so you can see, make sure you understand. So 0.05 times 80 equals 4%. 0.15 times 92 is 13.8%. Then for the midterm, 0.55 times 86 equals 47.3%. And then finally, 0.25 times 84 equals 21%. Now, if I add all these together, this should equal my total overall grade. So 4% plus 13.8% plus 47.3% plus 21%. If you remember from the Ivy Learn Gradebook, that is what it said. My total grade was 86.1%. So just to review, the way it calculates your total grade, you need two things. You need the weight of each group, the weight for the quizzes, the homework, the midterm, and the final exam. And here are the weights that we found up in the upper right corner of our grade book. You could think of weightings as they're deciding what they want to be the most important things in your grade. Obviously, quizzes are only 5% of your grade. It's the least important group or item in your grade. You can see the most important factor in your overall grade are going to be your midterm exam scores, okay, because it's 55. So the weighting sort of tells you the importance of these different categories. So that's the first thing you need. Then for each of these categories, we have to look at my individual scores. For each of these categories, how have I been doing in the class? So in other words, you take, if you've had like maybe 10 homework scores, you take all those 10 homework scores and you take the average. And so far, my average homework score is like a 92%. And that's what I'm going to use then when I calculate my total grade. So you need the weights and you need my scores, and that's how you get the total. So hopefully now you understand sort of how grades are weighted and how to do the calculation. Now here's a question that I get a lot. Teachers get a lot, especially toward the end of the class. Say the only thing you have left is the final exam. Now the final exam is worth 25% of your grade, so it can make a big difference in your grade. Maybe you're done taking quizzes, you're done with homework, you're done with midterm exams. The only thing you have left is the final exam. And oftentimes students will then come and ask, how do I need, what kind of score do I need to get on the final exam to get a, say for instance, a B in the class? Maybe that's their goal, to get a B. Or maybe they just want to pass the class. So they say, what do I need to get on the final exam to get a C? Well, now that we've gone over this formula, how could we answer that question? So I'm just going to take, let's pretend I'm going to use these same scores, but I have not, let's assume I have not completed the final exam. So let me rewrite down this, let me rewrite my scores here. So here, pretend the only thing we have left in the class is to take the final exam. And I look in the grade book, and for the quizzes for this class, I've got an 80%. And for the homework, my score is 92%. So in other words, these scores are not going to change. I'm done with quiz and homeworks. These are my scores in the class. The only thing left is the final exam. As a matter of fact, we're going to, in a minute, do a calculation to determine the final exam score we need to get. So I'm going to actually, you'll see in a few minutes, I'm going to call the final exam score X. And we're going to, in a sense, solve an equation for X. So let me, just to make it clear, put the weights again. So quizzes for this class is worth 5% of your grade. The homework is 15% of the grade. Midterm exam is 55% of the grade. And the final exam is worth 25%. And just to remind you, when I do the calculation, when I look at these weights, I'm not going to plug in 5, I'm going to plug in 0.05. And for the homework, 0.15. And for the midterm exam, 0.55. And for the final exam, 0.25. So here's the goal. Say the goal for this student the goal is to get a B. Now, a B means the total score must be between 80 and 89%. So you say, oh, if they want a B, let's say, well, what do they have to get on the final exam to get an 80? Because 80 is the lowest score for a B. So that's what they really want to know. How do I have to do on the final exam to get at least an 80 for my total grade? Well, I'm going to do this same calculation here. I'm going to go plug in all these numbers. The only difference is when I get to my final exam score, because I have not taken the final exam score, I'm going to put an X in here because that's what I'm trying to figure out. I'm trying to figure out what should my final exam score be to reach my goal, right? Because I said final exam, I haven't taken the final exam yet. I'll have a score, so I'm going to call it X. And the other difference is when we did this equation a few minutes ago, we knew we had all this information and we plugged it in to find our total, 86.1. Well, here, I don't know my final score yet, my final exam score, but you know what I'm going to plug in? I'm going to plug in 80% for my total because I'm trying to figure out what should my final exam score be so that when I do this whole calculation, it gives me a total or final score of 80. So let me just do that now. So here's this equation. The equation to calculate your total score. I'm going to go ahead and put in 80% because that's my goal. Now for the quiz, here's my weighting, here's my quiz score, right? So 0.05 times 80% plus for my homework, here's my weighting, here's my homework score, 0.15 times 92%. For the midterm, the weighting is 0.55. The weighting times my midterm exam scores, which is 86%. Now for the final exam, the weighting is 0.25, but I don't have a final exam score yet. So I'm going to put in X. Now this is how you calculate your total score. And my goal is for my total score to be 80. So I put 80 in here. So now I have an equation with one variable, and I simply solve for this variable X. So just to make it very clear, I'll multiply these out one at a time. Matter of fact, I've already done it. This ended up being 4%. For the homework, it was 13.8%. For the midterm exams, it was 47.3%. Now here, for the final exam, I just have 0.25x. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add these three numbers together. Just to make sure I don't make a mistake, I'll use my calculator. 4 plus 13.8 plus 47.3 equals 65.1 plus this 0.25x. Now, if I want to solve for x, I need to take this 65.1 and move it to the other side. How do I do that? Well, I simply subtract 65.1 from both sides. So 80 minus 65.1 equals 14.9% equals 0.25x. If I want to solve for x, I need to get rid of or to move this 0.25. What do I do in math? To get rid of this 0.25, well, I can divide both sides by 0.25. And when I do that, 14.9 divided by 0.25 equals 59.6%. So what is that saying? This is the final exam score needed to get the total score equal to 80%. In other words, this is the score you need to get the lowest possible B. So you get a B in the class. So it sort of makes sense because look at so far, quizzes, he's got a B, homework, he's getting an A, midterm exams, a mid B. So he's got B's and A's so far in the class. So now it's like, so what do I need on the final exam to keep my B? Actually, he doesn't have to do that great. In order at least to get a 59.6%. Just for fun, what if he says, well, what if I study really hard and work? Is it possible to get an A in this class? Well, in that case, I go back to this calculation, and instead of an 80%, I'm going to put in 90%, because a 90% would be the lowest possible A. So if you look, basically this whole calculation, I can come down to here and replace this 80 with a 90 and then see what happens. So I have 90% equals 65.1% plus 0.25x. Now I'm going to solve for x again, so I'm going to subtract 65.1 from both sides. So 90 minus 65.1 equals 24.9% equals 0.25x. So now x, if I divide both sides by 0.25, and look at this. Wow. This says on the final exam, the student will need to get a 99.6%, right? Perfect score is 100%. So basically, he would need to get a perfect score on the final exam to end up with an A in the class. So what does that say? Well, that says, if you look at what he's done so far, most of his grades are B, homework is a low A, so he's running his current grades a solid B. To keep the B, he doesn't have to do that great. But if he says, okay, I'm getting sort of a decent B, what would I have to do to bump it up to an A? And you know what? He has to get a really high score. In other words, the idea is so much of the class is finished. It's like it's baked into the cake, because you look at the 5% is done, 50% is finished, 55, add these up. So far, 75% of the class is finished. He can't, there's nothing the student can do. That's already been decided. There's 25% left. And so how would he have to do on the 25% to get an A? And the point is he has to do almost perfect, which means pretty difficult to do. So he's in good shape to keep his B. He doesn't have to do that great. Just for fun, one last calculation. What if he says, well, you know, I just want to make sure worst cases, I pass the class, I get a C. Well, a C is 70%. So see if I can squeeze it in here. The goal is to get a C. So now what do? For a B, we put in 80% for the total. For an A, I put in 90%. Well, for a C, I put in 70%. So I put in 70% equals 65.1% plus 0.25. Just because I'm almost out of room, I'm going to go ahead and do this calculation all at once. So I'm going to take 70 minus 65.1 equals, turns out equals 4.9, and I divide that by 0.25. So you know what score he needs to get on the final exam to at least just pass the class? Wow, 19.6%. Seems sort of crazy, but he can really bomb the final exam and still get out of there with a C. Of course, that would not be a good goal to have, just to pass the class. But this just shows you he probably shouldn't be too nervous. He's going to probably pass the class. But of course, in this case, getting an A could be pretty rough. I guess probably his goal is just to keep his B. So study and do well and get at least, you know, like a 60% or better, then he'll get his B. So hopefully this explains sort of how weighted grades work. And really the key for weighted grades are these weightings. This shows you the impact each category has on your grade. Quizzes have very little impact. Homework, 15%, that's so-so. Midterm exams, over half your overall grade is determined by your midterm exams. So if someone, for example, oftentimes there'll be students who do good on the homework, they really work hard, they come to class, they have a pretty good quiz score, and for whatever reason, they don't do very well on their midterm exams. But they think, well, I've got a really good homework score and I've got a good quiz score. Now, I didn't do so good in my final exam, but why is my grade so low? Well, because look, your midterm exam is like worth over half the total. It's almost like if you had your choice, what do you want to get good scores on? Well, you need to get good scores on your midterm exams because that has the biggest impact on your grade. And the next biggest impact is the final exam. So you don't want to go and bomb the final exam because that's worth 1/4 of your grade, and that can definitely hurt your grade. I mean, if you do great on the final exam, then that can really help your grade. But if you do poorly, it can really drag your grade down. So the whole key is the weighting. The weighting tells you what really affects your grade the most. And in most classes, it's going to be your exams. If you add these up, 55 plus 25, that's 80%. 80% of the class, your class grade, is going to be determined by midterm and final exams. And 20% quiz or homework. So quiz and homework can help. And you want to do is get a higher score as you can because that's going to help you. But bottom line is you can't do great on quiz and homeworks and then not do very well on the exams because then it's just going to hurt your grade too much. You've got to do well on your exams to do well in the class. All right, I hope this helps. And now you can understand better where your grades come from and even what you need to do on the final exam to meet your goals.